We're going to now have a look at this covenant that was made by Ahaz with the Assyrians, and we're going to see just how important this is for events of the latter days, which we are actually observing right now. You know, it was just last October, a month after Putin had moved planes and troops into Syria, that the Time magazine came out with this cover: Russia just wants to be friends. Yeah. And I think we know better, don't we? But how the political landscape of the Middle East was changed in September 2015 is just quite remarkable, and it's prophesied. It's actually prophesied in Isaiah. We're going to see that that's part of the study that we're dealing with over the course of this weekend. Now, the section of the history of the nation of Judah and of Israel that we're dealing with, you can see on that chart. Now, I'm going to give you a bigger picture of that in a moment. But the yellow line, of course, is the kingdom of Israel in the north, and they were about to go into dissolution, to be taken into captivity by Sargon in 722 BC in the 6th year of Hezekiah. So they were about to come to an end. One of their last kings was Pekah, the son of Remaliah, and he was in an alliance with Rezin, the king of Syria. And they wanted to replace the king of Judah with an appointee of their own. And so that's why, of course, Isaiah chapter 7 actually outlines that history, and Yahweh offers a sign to Ahaz that he wasn't going to let that happen. The throne of David wasn't going to be dissolved by the activity of Pekah and Rezin. But Ahaz, of course, wouldn't cooperate with his God. So there had to be another way of going about this. And there was. So here is a slightly larger version of that section of the chart that you've just seen. Now you'll notice there in the top circle we've got Rezin, the king of Syria. We've got Tiglath-Pileser III, the king of Assyria. We have Pekah here, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel at the time. And we've got Ahaz down here, the king of Judah. And as Isaiah 7 pointed out, we don't really need to go back to it, do we? We had a look at the first couple of verses. These two kings are an alliance against Judah. In Isaiah 7, chapter 7, verses 3 to 11, as we saw, Yahweh seeks to help Ahaz and offers him a sign. And he says, I will not ask for a sign. I don't have any faith in Yahweh, the God of Israel. Now I want to do a little exercise with you at the outset of this study. I want you to use your fingers. I want you to follow me through the book of Isaiah and then into the book of Micah. And if you do have a highlighting pencil of some kind, and you haven't done this exercise before, I would suggest it's very, very helpful to highlight the word the Assyrian in these prophecies. Because when you read it next time, you're not going to read it the same way. If you haven't seen fully the type that is set forth here, you'll never read this scripture the same way again. You won't read it as history. You'll read it as prophecy, and that's how it should be read. Because the historical platform, the historical framework that God established in the life of Ahaz and Hezekiah is used of the prophecies of the latter days. So we're going to start in Isaiah chapter 10, brothers and sisters and young people. In Isaiah chapter 10, and at verse 5. Now we'll be coming back, we'll be circling back to some of these passages a little later on in our study. I just want to go through the names that are used here. So then, the Assyrian is the title of latter-day Gog, the Gog of Ezekiel 38 verse 2. Son of man, set thy face against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech and Tubal. The Assyrian is the title used in Isaiah and Micah for that same power of the latter days. And we're going to see this from the context alone. So you're in Isaiah chapter 10 with me? Have a look at verse 5. Now, if you've got your highlighting pencil, the word Assyrian is the one that you want. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. Now, is this a latter-day prophecy? Is this about the activity of Gog? I want you to read on with me. I want you to read into verse 6. I will send him against a hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge to take the spoil and to take the prey. Anybody got a suggestion where that might be from? Ezekiel chapter 38. Hast thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou come to take a prey? The identical words. So the Spirit is telling you, read Assyrian, read Gog. It's the latter-day Gogian power that's being referred to here. Now, how do we know that this is the right interpretation? Well, you don't have to read very far. Come to verse 24 of Isaiah chapter 10. Therefore thus saith Adonai Yahweh of armies, O my people that dwellest in Zion, be not afraid of the Assyrian. He shall smite thee with the rod, and shall lift up his staff against thee out of the manner of Egypt. For yet a very little while, and the indignation shall cease, and mine anger in their destruction. And Yahweh of armies shall stir up a scourge for him according to the slaughter of Midian at the rock of Oreb. Now, those of you who have done a little bit of work on the book of Judges will know that when Gideon and his 300 men destroy the host of the Midianites, in Judges chapter 7, it's a type of Armageddon. It's used that way right throughout the prophecy of Isaiah. Just step back to chapter 9 of Isaiah, for example, and verse 4 and 5. Isaiah 9 verse 4. For thou hast broken the yoke of his burden, and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, as in the day of Midian. So here's the victory of Gideon over the Midianites. What's this time? Well, look at verse 5. For every battle of the warriors with confused noise, and the garments rolled in blood, but this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. What does it lead to? Or look at verses 6 and 7. Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government of the kingdom of God. That's what it leads to. It leads to the establishment of the kingdom of God. And verse 7 says, of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end upon the throne of David. The zeal of Yahweh will perform this. So you see, when God uses the Midianites, he's using a type out of the book of Judges. He's saying that when Gideon destroyed the Midianites with his 300, that was a type of Armageddon. So when you come to chapter 10, and he talks there in verse 26 about the slaughter of Midian, we know it's about Armageddon. Alright, so you know your context. The Bible speaks for itself. So come with me now to Isaiah chapter 14, a bit further on in the prophecy. Now if I was to ask you what's Isaiah 14 about, you'd say the king of Babylon. Yes, true. But when we get to the end of the chapter, we read this in verse 24. Yahweh of hosts has sworn, saying, surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains tread him underfoot. Then shall his yoke depart from off them, and the burden shall depart from off their shoulders. So when is this, brothers and sisters? Can we be assured about the timing of this? When is this going to happen? Look at the next verse, verse 26. This is the purpose that is purposed upon the whole earth. And this is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations. This is not about some local conflict in the land of Israel in the days of Hezekiah. That is the type of what Christ is going to do in the whole earth. See, when you read this term, the Assyrian, you're reading about latter-day Gog that comes down upon the mountains of Israel to precipitate Armageddon. Right? Got the picture? Well, I won't need to do much explanation from now on, will I? We just go and look at the verses, and you can highlight the word the Assyrian, and you'll see the context around it. It will always be that context. So come to chapter 30 of Isaiah, and verse 31. Now those of you who know this section of Isaiah will know that from chapter 30 through the end of chapter 35, which of course then we have the historical chapters 36 to 39 of Hezekiah, okay, you will know that this entire section is about the whole program of 40 years from Armageddon to the time when the kingdom is fully established. That's the picture of Isaiah 35. The redeemed of Yahweh shall return. It's not talking about you and me, brothers and sisters. It's talking about the nations who are subjected to Christ. The context tells you that. So you've got Armageddon in chapter 30 through to chapter 31. You've got a little hint of it in chapter 33. But then it shifts. In chapter 33 it shifts to the overthrow of Babylon the Great. And when you get to chapter 34 it's about Edom. A sacrifice in Bozrah and Edom. That's about the overthrow of the Catholic system towards the end of the 40 years of conflict that Christ will undertake to establish the kingdom. The whole program is here. So where does it start? Well, it starts with Armageddon. So in chapter 30 and in verse 31 you read this. Through the voice of Yahweh shall the Assyrian be beaten down, which smote with a rod. Now if you read around that context, you will see it's about Armageddon. Take verse 27, which is the beginning of this section. Behold, the name of Yahweh cometh from far, burning with his anger, and the burden thereof is heavy. His lips are full of indignation, his tongue is a devouring fire, and so it goes on like that. This is Armageddon. And it's the Assyrian that's destroyed in that conflict. Come to chapter 31 and verse 8 and 9. Then shall the Assyrian fall with the sword. So there's our name again. Not of a mean man, not of a mighty man, not of a mean man shall devour him. But he shall flee from the sword, and his young men shall be discomfited, and he shall pass over to his stronghold for fear, and his princes shall be afraid of the ensign, saith Yahweh. We know who the ensign here is. This is our Lord Jesus Christ. And goes on to say this, whose fire is in Zion, and his furnace in Jerusalem. This is about the destruction of the Gogian confederacy upon the mountains of Israel outside the walls of Jerusalem. Got a bit of a feel for that? Well, Isaiah's not the only prophecy that uses the Assyrian. Micah uses the Assyrian. So come to the prophecy of Micah. Now why would Micah do this, do you think? Well, I'm going to read you Micah 1 and verse 1, which says, the word of Yahweh that came to Micah the Morashite in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. So there's your answer. The same historical background. When Micah prophesied, he was prophesying in the reign of Jotham, the father of Ahaz, right through the reign of Ahaz and into the reign of Hezekiah. He was there at the time of the Assyrian invasion. And so when you read in Micah chapter 5 these words, it's no surprise, is it? We know what Micah 5 is about. It's about our Lord Jesus Christ. And you read this in verse 4. And he shall stand and feed in the strength of Yahweh, in the majesty of the name of Yahweh his God. And they shall abide, for now shall he be great unto the ends of the earth. And this man, Christ, shall be the peace, when the Assyrian shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our palaces. Then we shall raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 princes of men. Actually a reference to the king priests that will be with our Lord Jesus Christ. We'll come back to that later on. Look at verse 6. And he, it should read, he, Christ, shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod in the entrances thereof. Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian, when he cometh into our land, and when he treadeth within our borders. So brothers and sisters, there's no doubt, is there? No doubt at all what that context is about. It's about the Lord Jesus Christ coming in his second advent to set up the kingdom. And he's going to have to deal with a latter-day Assyrian, the Gogian confederacy upon the mountains of Israel. So it's all based upon what happens in the history of Judah in the days of Hezekiah, and preceding him, of course, in the time of Ahaz, when he makes a covenant with the Assyrians. It's a type of Armageddon. But of course, the Assyrian army was destroyed outside the walls of Jerusalem. And so will Gog's army be destroyed outside the walls of Jerusalem. So faithless Ahaz, who we've seen as a type of modern Israel, who made that first pact with the Assyrians, had 2 problems. I want you to come to 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 16 and verses 7 to 9. He had 2 problems. We're going to see what they were, and we're going to see how they match latter-day Israel. Second Kings chapter 16, verses 7 to 9. Just to get the context straight in our minds, look at verse 5. It says, Then Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to war, and they besieged Ahaz, but they could not overcome him. Now their purpose, of course, was that they wanted to establish their own ruler on the throne of David. Look at verse 7. So what does Ahaz do? Well, we know what happens here because Isaiah comes to him, Isaiah 7, offers a sign, he says, not interested. What does he do next? Well, this is what he does, verse 7. So Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am thy servant and thy son. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria, and out of the hand of the king of Israel, which rise up against me. And Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of Yahweh, and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria hearkened unto him. For the king of Assyria went up against Damascus, which was where reason was established, and took it, and carried the people of it captive to Kir, and slew reason. So there's your history. Pretty plain, isn't it? Pretty simple. Ahaz sends messages, I'm in trouble, I've got this Pekah, king of Israel, and Reason, king of Syria, in alliance. They want to overthrow me. Can you help me? Yep. So the king of Assyria attacks Damascus, kills Reason. One of his problems gone, isn't it? And the other one wasn't far behind it. So the Syrians were subdued in around about 720 BC under Tiglath-Pileser. They were subdued by this attack that you can see there in verse 9. Damascus was taken and destroyed, and history records that it lay in ruins for 40 years. And the inhabitants were carried away captive into Assyria. We were told that in 2 Kings 16. And if you go to Isaiah 7 verse 8, you'll see there's a reference there to the overthrow of Israel as well. So in this prophecy was fulfilled, brothers and sisters. The prophecy that was read for us to introduce this class. Isaiah chapter 17. So can I take you to Isaiah 17 and have a look at this prophecy being fulfilled? So let's have a look and see what happens to Syria. Now this is all very important because, well, Israel, the nation today, just happens to have a Syrian and a Russian border. Did you hear the words of Prime Minister Netanyahu recently when he said, Israel now has a Russian border? Yeah, interesting, isn't it? They've got a Syrian border, but the Russians are in Syria right now. So this is a problem. We're going to see just how precise this prophecy is in relation to the latter days. We're actually watching these things happen right now. Isn't it marvellous that when the Word of God is there, we can actually read not only what is happening, but what is going to happen. We know what's going to happen. And we're going to see that in our studies, God willing, over the course of these 2 days. So what about this prophecy of Isaiah 17 verse 1? It says this, the burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. That was fulfilled when Tiglath-Pileser came along and he killed Reason, he destroyed Damascus. History says it lay in ruins for 40 years. It didn't stay that way though, as we're going to see. The kingdom of Syria remained a province of Assyria, so you don't want to confuse those. Syria, Assyria, 2 different powers, till the capture of Nineveh by the Medes in 625 BC, when it fell under the conquerors. So there's our prophecy, 2 Kings 16 verse 9. I want to just go into a little bit about the destiny of Damascus, what happened after that, and of course what's going to happen today. So Isaiah 17, though it is a prophecy that was fulfilled in the days of Ahaz, is nevertheless like a lot of prophecies. It has a primary application for that time, and it has a secondary application for the latter days. We know that's true, don't we? And that's exactly what's going to happen here. So let's just have a look at what the prophecies about Damascus say. And there are 3 of them at least. There's this one in Isaiah 17 verse 1 that says that Damascus will be taken away from being a city, but it should be a ruinous heap. Fulfilled, but it was rebuilt. We've got Amos 1 verse 4, that Yahweh would send a fire into the house of Hazael. Now Hazael, of course, was a king of Syria, which should devour the palaces of Ben-Hadad, another king of Syria. But you know, I want you to come. Just put something in Isaiah 17 if you wouldn't mind, because we'll be back here shortly. Come to Jeremiah 49. That's the other prophecy of the 3. Jeremiah 49. Now this takes a little bit more explaining. In Jeremiah 49 we have a series of prophecies. There's one against Edom, and there's one against Damascus. It starts in verse 23. Jeremiah 49. Concerning Damascus, Hamath is confounded, and Arpad, for they have heard evil tidings. They are faint-hearted. There is sorrow on the sea. It cannot be quiet. Damascus is waxed feeble, and turneth herself to flee, and fear has seized on her. Anguish and sorrows have taken her as a woman in travail. Then we got this strange verse, verse 25. How is the city of praise not left? The city of my joy. Now there will be different translations in this room, and you might have a better translation of that. The one you can see in yellow on the screen behind me is from the Interlinear Scriptural Analyzer. It says, how is it that the boasted city is not forsaken, the town of elation? Now what this is about, and the context demonstrates it, is that when Tiglath-Pileser brought his Assyrian army up to Damascus, the people greatly feared, just like they did when he came to the walls of Jerusalem. They greatly feared. And there were some people saying, let's get out of here. And probably some did. But the young men of the city said, not on your life. You know, I've had my spinach this morning, I'm going to fight the Assyrians. Not on your life, I'm not fleeing. And they were boasting about how Damascus could defend itself against the Assyrians. But they were all cut off, they were all destroyed. And you see, the next verse tells you that. Verse 26, it says, therefore her young men shall fall in her... These are the boasters. These are the ones who are saying, we're not going to forsake this city. It's the city of our pride, of our power, of our elation. We're not going to forsake it. Well, okay. A bit like ISIS, they're going to kill you. Because they were all slaughtered in the streets of that city, as verse 26 says. And all the men of war should be cut off in that day, saith Yahweh of hosts. You had your chance, you didn't get out when you could, so you're all going to be dead. However, by the time of the Medo-Persian supremacy, Damascus had not only been rebuilt as a city from the ruins in which it lay for 40 years, but it was the most famous city in Syria, according to the historian Strabo. So it bounced back. Could I ask you what Damascus is like today? I took a party there to Damascus in 2010. We stayed in a couple of hotels. We went to some delightful restaurants. Don't bother today. Half of Damascus is in ruins today, and the other half is shortly going to be in ruins. And we're going to see why. Because the latter-day Assyrian has a work against Damascus. And that's what Isaiah 17 is about. It has a secondary application. The latter-day Assyrian is there breathing down their necks. He's got 150,000 soldiers on the ground. He's got all these aeroplanes. He's bombing ISIS and other people at the moment. You wait, the time will come. And Damascus is going to be a heap again. So who is this ISIS crowd? Well, they're a very important catalyst in the whole divine scheme, brothers and sisters. ISIS is a temporary catalyst for the latter-day Assyrian to come into the Middle East. They're not going to play a huge role, and I want to show you why they're not going to play a huge role in the future. They're going to be wiped out. The same treatment that they've given to the people that they've overcome is going to be given to them. I want to demonstrate why. Okay, so who is this ISIS? Now this is an acronym, isn't it? ISIS. It means the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. You know, you probably heard your leaders also call them ISIL. Heard that one? ISIL? Yeah. Well, it means the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Now, we don't use this name, the Levant, today. So what is the Levant? Well, it's an area including Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Cyprus, Palestine, and the southern part of Turkey, and Israel. It's a pretty big area. Okay? So ISIS has got this idea that they're going to set up this caliphate, this kingdom, on the territory of the Levant. That's why they call themselves ISIL. Now they emerged in 2011 in Iraq as an outgrowth of Al-Qaeda. You know, the people who flew the planes into the Twin Towers and into the Pentagon in 2001. Remember that one? Well, I think you can't forget it. They call it 9/11. Yeah, that's the people. Well, Al-Qaeda thinks that ISIS is too extreme. Yeah, they don't want anything to do with it. ISIS is too extreme for Al-Qaeda. That's how That's how tough these people are. Now they've recruited rebel fighters from Syria, from many other countries. We've got people gone from Australia to join ISIS. People from Britain, people from America, from all over the world have gone to join them because, of course, they pay good money as well. And their acts, of course, are well known. They're on the news all the time. They captured large swathes of Syria and Iraq, the latter portion of 2014, early part of 2015, and indiscriminately beheaded, especially Christians and Yazidis. They butchered them, they beheaded them, and any non-Muslim or anybody that was a perceived enemy got their head lopped off. I've seen some, I don't watch these things very often, but I've seen some brutal videos. I saw them, for instance, when they were dealing with one town. They lined up all the young men, all the men of fighting age, and took them out to the river, probably Euphrates River. They took them out to the river, and there was this wall. And one guy would push them up, push the fellow up, guy would shoot him, push him off. And the river was full of floating bodies, shot in the back of the head. We took our group to a place called Palmyra. Now this is where you've got the best example of a temple of Baal or Bel in Palmyra. Well, you don't go there today to see the temple of Bel because they've blown it up, all right? Like they did most other places that they came. Not that I'm worried about that, I've blown the thing up myself. But, you know, they blew it up. It's a tourist icon, see? Well, we were there in 2010. We went and had lunch in a restaurant. You know what I saw? The day after they got there, all the people of that main street there's only one main street, all the people of that main street, the people in the restaurants who served us, their bodies were on the ground, but they had no heads on them. They beheaded the whole lot of them. That's ISIS. So their acts are well known. They're even credited with 1,000 civilian casualties outside of Iraq and Syria. In January 2015, several of them attacked in Paris. 20 died. They died in the magazine Charlie Hebdo, the satirical publisher, and they died in a kosher supermarket, a Jewish supermarket. All right, 20 of them. Well, of course, that got outdone, didn't it? A Russian plane was down, they say, in the Sinai by an ISIS-planted bomb. Of course, Putin's going to get revenge for that. In November 2015, we had the Paris attacks where 130 people were shot dead or blown up. All right, so you know about the acts of ISIS, don't you? And they've made themselves pretty, they're pretty prominent in world affairs. Well, this is the area they control. The yellow on the screen. Oh, hang on, that doesn't look all that much, does it? That's all they control. The yellow on the screen. And they've lost some of that since that map was drawn. So they're not a big power in the scheme of things. They are not going to establish a caliphate. That's a pipe dream, because they're going to be destroyed by the latter day Assyrian before they get around to it. That's what's going to happen to them. Well, they've reached out. You can go to North America, Europe, Middle East, Australia, you'll find ISIS cells. We've got idiots in Australia who've gone around shooting policemen in the head. One who took out a knife is going to behead some innocent citizen in the street. Yeah. That's the kind of thing that's happening because of ISIS. But it's a temporary phenomenon. Now let me just veer off from that. It's enough about ISIS for the time being. And we'll talk about their future in a moment. What about the problems that Russia, and particularly Putin as the leader of Russia, has caused for the nations of Western Europe and for the nations of the world generally? Now we know what's been happening. Russia and NATO are at loggerheads at the moment over European security, because when the former Soviet Union countries of the West became part of the European Union, they then wanted to join NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation. Well, Russia said, no, we can't have that. So Putin's been doing all sorts of things to try and stop that happening. He's been flying planes over the UK and even here over America or near America. He's been doing all sorts of things to make it clear he's not happy about these nations becoming part of NATO. The European Union has strong sanctions against Russia over the problem in Ukraine, the fact that Russia is supporting the rebels in the east of Ukraine, etc. The world certainly hasn't forgotten the assumption, the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula by Russia in February 2014. He just took it over. They haven't forgotten that. Russia's unilateral entry into Syria in September last year to support Bashar al-Assad has been a thorn in the side of the West. And Russian attacks on anti-Assad forces as well as ISIS. In other words, he's fighting the rebels that the Western nations are supporting. He's blowing them up too. See, that's caused a few headaches, hasn't it, brothers and sisters? You've been following all of this, haven't you? But what's happened after the Paris attacks? What has happened after the Paris attacks? Well, there's suddenly all of this stuff seems to have been pushed into the background. All of a sudden it seems to be forgotten. And now you've got a new alliance forming in the wake of the Paris attacks in November between the US and Russia and France to destroy ISIS. Putin and the President of France, Hollande, have agreed to close military cooperation in the war against ISIS. France has not called on NATO to do that, they called on Russia. And a French aircraft carrier has joined a Russian aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean to fight ISIS. Okay? Now, hang on. What about all those problems they had? What about all the sanctions they had against Russia? Well, it's all forgotten because 130 people got shot in Paris. That's how quickly things change. That's how the angels can change the course of world events. And so, we're watching it. The Western powers are being squeezed into a compromise on Assad. They want him out. Russia says he's not going out. They've got a compromise on that. So what about Putin and ISIS? Well, ISIS signed their death warrant in September 2014. You know what they did? They personally threatened Putin over his support for Assad in Syria. And they said that their Islamic State would free southern Muslim Russian states from Kremlin control, liberate the Chechens from Russian control, and ultimately they would have their people that they say they have in Russia attack Moscow itself. What idiots. I mean, they are dealing with the most powerful man on earth who does anything he wants and gets away with it. Right? They have signed their own death warrant. And you know he's in Syria to destroy who? ISIS. Yeah. And eventually he will. He vowed in November 2015 to hunt down ISIS wherever they are. And you know, he's a very crude man, isn't he? He said, even if they're in the toilet, I'll get them there. That's the crudity of that man. It doesn't matter where I'll get them. I'll hunt them down. That's this man. He's going to destroy ISIS in due course because he happens to be the leader of the latter-day Assyrians. Yeah. We're going to see just how much of this we're watching right now. There was a headline in the Daily Express in the UK, the 7th of November 2015, that said, "End of ISIS. Putin sending 150,000 soldiers to Syria to wipe out evil Islamic State." Yeah. Well, that's enough about signs of the times. Now let's have a look and see what the Bible says about this. I want you to come to Daniel chapter 7. Now, some of you in this room will have heard me talk about this before. Some perhaps not. But this is one of the most important prophecies that's actually happening right now. We need to come to grips with. Daniel 7 verse 7, as you well know, the first 7 verses of Daniel chapter 7 are all about the 4 beasts, the successive world empires. It matches, of course, Nebuchadnezzar's image of chapter 2. So you have, instead of the head of gold, you have the lion of Assyro-Babylonian Empire. Then you have the Medo-Persian bear in place of the chest of silver. Then you have the Greek Macedonian leopard in place of the belly and thighs of brass, and so on. And you've got this 4th beast that is in place of the legs of iron. It's described here in verse 7 of Daniel 7. "And this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, strong exceedingly, it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it." Now you notice those words in green? They've never been fulfilled by the 4th beast. Never. They're still to be fulfilled in the latter days. It never happened in the history of Rome. I want to show you that. And it says, he was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So what about this fourth beast? Well, you might say it's long since gone. The Roman Empire's gone. All that's left of it is the iron of Catholicism. Yes, true. But this fourth beast, this fourth empire, has to be in existence in the latter days. We know that when you come to Daniel chapter 7 and verse 11, because it says this. Daniel 7 verse 11. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, that's the horn on the fourth beast, which we read of in verse 8, it says this. I beheld even till the beast, the fourth beast, was slain, and his body was given to the burning flame. So who does this? Well, Christ and the saints. Verses 13 and 14 talk about that. So Christ and the saints will destroy this fourth beast, and in fact they will have to deal with the other three beasts who will be around. Because you see, when Gog puts together its great confederacy, it has reformed all of those powers again. It's taken over the territories of the four empires. It's taken their people into its empire. You've got the great image empire which stands up in Daniel chapter 2. And as we know, that's the drama of Daniel 2, isn't it? Daniel 2 is not about a succession of world empires. Well, it is, but it's not really about that. It's about what's going to happen in the latter days. And that's what Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar. God is telling you what's going to happen in the latter days. That image has got to be put back together. And the territories of those four empires have got to be brought together into one massive image empire. That's why you read of the other beasts here in verse 12 of Daniel 7. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away. Okay? So, brothers and sisters and young people, this is a prophecy of the latter days. So what part of it is still yet to be fulfilled in terms of the words of verse 7? Well, this is the part. So, this is what Brother Maurice Stewart wrote in the Prophecy of Daniel in August 1973. Now, some of you will have his notes on the Prophecy of Daniel. Well, I'll tell you something. Hold on to them. They're going to be worth a lot of money pretty soon. You know why? Because when they were reprinted, they weren't reprinted exactly as they were in 1973. All right? Certain things were taken out, and this is one of them. Now, I don't know what stupidity led to that, but it's stupidity. He had this right, brothers and sisters. He had it right. Maurice Stewart had most things right on prophecy, didn't he? All right? And he had this right. We need to recognise that. This is what he says about Daniel 7 verse 7. Let us emphasise, in other words, it's important. Here is an important statement that has not as yet been fulfilled. Rome has never trampled the residue of Persia underfoot. It has never occupied all this territory. In other words, the territory of the previous empire that it took over. A power must yet arise which will occupy the territories of Babylon, Persia, Greece and Rome, to be afterwards subjected to a higher power, namely Jesus Christ. Russia will do this. Thus, like the image of Daniel chapter 2, whose metals will have to be confederated together before they can be broken to pieces together, as required by Daniel 2:35, so also this terrible fourth beast vision has a latter day application, and so it does. Let me show you how. Let me show you why. That was the Assyro-Babylonian Empire of Nebuchadnezzar. See the area there, in the darkish area? Nimrod established that way back in 2240 BC. But it was Nebuchadnezzar who brought it to the height of its power. It was destroyed in 539 by the Medo-Persians. It was gobbled up. You know, this bear has 3 ribs in its mouth. Now, normally when an animal's got 3 ribs in its mouth, it means that the rest of whatever it was that had 3 ribs is gone. It's consumed it. He's eaten it. Yeah. So the Medo-Persians came along and gobbled up the whole region. But they were followed in due course by Alexander and his forces. And they gobbled up all the territory of the Medo-Persians and added bits here and there. But what about the Romans when they came along? 67 BC to AD 476. Well, you notice where they got to. They got to the head of the Persian Gulf, only briefly by the way. They couldn't hold it because the Parthians were too strong for them. So, you know, when Hadrian came to power in 118 AD, he abandoned Trajan's conquest, his predecessor's conquests over here, and he built a line of forts that go north-south through modern Jordan and Syria. I know they are there. I stood in some of them. I can show you pictures of them. Every Roman mile, there's a line that became the eastern border of the Roman Empire for the rest of its history. So what's missing here? What's missing? Every previous empire gobbled up the whole territory of the empire that preceded it, not Rome. There's a residue. A big residue, by the way. And it happens to be that area there. And it includes a portion of Syria, Iraq, the whole of Iran, portion of the Stan states to the south of Russia, which are already in Russia's possession, Afghanistan, and half of Pakistan up to the Indus River. That is the residue of the three empires. That is what's referred to in Daniel 7 verse 7. This latter-day fourth beast, when it's revived, and as Brother Maury said, and he's quite right, Russia will do this, when it's revived, has to stamp the residue with the feet of it. In other words, it's not gentle treatment. The last time I stamped on something it hurt. Alright? It's not gentle treatment. It's about putting troops on the ground. He's got 150,000 in Syria already, which is on the western border of the residue. So what do you reckon is going to happen tomorrow and the day after? Yeah. Progressively, events will lead to the complete consumption of that area, control by Russia of that entire region, which is why you read in Ezekiel 38 verse 5 that one of the Confederate powers with latter-day Gog is Persia. That doesn't mean Iran. It means the Persia that Ezekiel understood. What did he understand? The region you're looking at there, bounded by the red. Because that's where the Persian Empire went to. Okay? That territory has got to be part of the confederacy of Gog, the latter-day Assyrian. And he's right now in Syria, ready for the job. September 2015, troops came in with aircraft. Iran is actually helping its fellow Shiite government in Iraq against the Sunni ISIS. Sunni ISIS power, of course, is against all Shiites, and Shiites are against all Sunnis. ISIS threatened Russia, and Putin in particular, in September 2014, signed their own death warrant. And that's why you see this name here is very interesting. You might have heard your leaders talk about ISIS using the name Daesh. Right? Daesh. Now ISIS doesn't like this. It's an adapted acronym of their Arabic name. Now I don't speak Arabic. Anybody here speak Arabic? You might want to vocalise this for us, but no, please don't try, especially not God. It's similar to another Arabic word, das, which means to trample down or crush. Isn't that interesting? To trample down or crush, or stamp the residue with the feet thereof. That's going to be the end of ISIS. They're going to be wiped out when Russia takes that entire region from Syria across to Pakistan. They're going to do to ISIS what ISIS has done to others. And that will be the bit that they play in the divine economy to bring Russia. What else was going to bring Russia in this area? What do you reckon? So God provided ISIS to do the job. Isn't that amazing, brothers and sisters, what God can do?
Yeah.
Come to Daniel chapter 11 and verse 40. There are three references which all say the same thing. Ezekiel 38 verse 5, Daniel 7 verse 7, and Daniel 11 verse 40. They all teach the same thing. The assumption of the territory from Syria to Pakistan by the latter-day Gogian power, the latter-day Assyrian. Daniel 11:40 says this, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. Now we'll talk about who the him is here in a moment. It's actually the power occupying Constantinople or modern Istanbul. And the king of the north shall come against him, same him, like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Well, a portion of that verse has already been fulfilled. That which deals with the pushing by the king of the south at him. So in 1917, during the First World War, when Britain, which was the occupying power of Egypt, pushed the Turks from Palestine, that portion of the prophecy up to there was fulfilled. Okay? Now, to be called the king of the south or the king of the north, in terms of Daniel chapter 11, you have to be a foreign occupying power of someone else's land, which you're ruling for a time. Britain occupied Egypt from 1880 something to 1952. 1917 came within that period of time. That prophecy, the pushing of the Turks who were in possession of Palestine, the pushing of the Turks by the British power, the king of the south, coming up from Egypt, out of the land of Palestine, led, of course, to the formation of the state of Israel. Okay? Fulfilled. But not the second part. The second part of that verse, where it says, and the king of the north shall come against him, that is the power occupying Constantinople, like a whirlwind, that is yet to come. And that will be performed by the latter-day Assyrian. Russia, the occupying power of Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan and Pakistan, will invade the Middle East via Turkey. I want to show you exactly how that's going to happen. Now, the hymn here of Daniel 11:40, as Brother Thomas points out quite correctly in both Help Us Israel and the exposition of Daniel, the hymn here is the power occupying Constantinople. It is identified by this king of Daniel 11 verse 36. And the king shall do according to his will. This is the power. The king is the little horn of the goat of Daniel chapter 8 verse 9. It's a reference to the Roman Empire ruled from Constantinople in that time, support of the papacy and the Catholic Church. And this is what John Thomas wrote about that in Help Us Israel. He said, it matters not whether they be pagan Romans, Catholic Greeks, Muslim Turks, or Greek Catholic Russians, the power that rules in Constantinople and plants its standard in Assyria is the little horn of the Assyro-Macedonian horn of the goat, and therefore the hymn of Daniel 11 verse 40. Now, the power occupying Constantinople today happens to be Turkish, doesn't it? And the Turks were in control of Palestine in 1917. So we've got a prophecy that's about to be fulfilled, brothers and sisters. And it has to be fulfilled before there can be an invasion into the Middle East from the north down through Turkey. Because it's the king of the north that comes against him. And you can't be called the king of the north, biblically, unless you are a foreign occupying power of the territory of the Seleucid kingdom. When Alexander's kingdom was divided up into 4 sections, the 2 dominant parts were the Seleucid kingdom, king of the north, and the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, king of the south. You can't be called king of the north until you possess that territory. And what we're watching is the first stages of that coming to pass. And when they've got that territory, then they can attack down through Turkey, down the coastal strip of Lebanon and Israel and into Egypt. And then they're drawn back, of course, to Jerusalem. We'll talk about that a little later on in our studies, to be destroyed by Christ and the saints. So the names of Gog in prophecy goes through several phases here. Gogian power passes through several phases on its way to Armageddon. It's called the king of the north when the Seleucid territory is controlled. At that same time, they will have set their standard in ancient Assyria, be called the Assyrian. Then they become, when they take Constantinople later on, they become the little horn of the goat. And when they come down into Egypt, they're called in Isaiah 19 verse 4, a cruel Lord. That's the stages. That's the way it's going to play itself out. Now, I can see my time is running out on me, but I've got a few minutes, so I'm going to actually spend a little bit of time on what's happening between Russia and Israel today, because this class is called A Covenant with the Assyrians. Of the 8.18 million in the land of Israel today, 1.6 million are Russian Jews who came in the last 25 years. 1.7 million are Arabs. In May 2013, there were 10,000 Red Army veterans still alive from World War II living in Israel. How old will they be, do you think? Very late 80s, at the best? Early, mid-90s? Probably, most of them. There were 10,000 still alive in 2013 in Israel who had fought against Hitler in the Second World War. Shows you how many Russian Jews there are in Israel today. The links are now very strong. Putin visited there in 2012 in June. He said his talks with Netanyahu had been very detailed and very useful. I'm sure they were. Shimon Peres went to Moscow when he was president, November 2012, for the inauguration of the Jewish Museum and Tolerance Centre in Moscow. A Russian warship visited Haifa Harbour on the 13th of May 2013. They took many of those Red Army veterans aboard that Russian ship. I'm sure they had their cameras working because this ship has got ramps at the front and ramps at the back to let down tanks and other equipment onto the shore. They're probably looking for places where they could do that a little later on. And this is what the Russians said about that visit. There is something to be understood from this for the contemporary Middle East. Where we decided to make anchor is a clear statement both to the Israelis and the entire region. Think about that, the implications of that. Netanyahu went to Moscow in September 2015 to avoid conflict with Russia over Syria, because when Putin brought his planes in, of course the Israelis fly over Syria too, don't they? So he went there and said, well, let's not have any problem, like Russia's had with Turkey, for example. So he sorted that out with Putin. You've not heard any incidents of Russian and Israeli planes coming into contact? Of course you're not. You won't hear it either. It's been organised. Netanyahu, however, believes that the Six Nations, which includes Russia, who have agreed to ease sanctions on Iran, have made a historic mistake because Iran continues to enrich uranium. You notice this little verse down here? Hosea 12 verse 1. Ephraim feedeth on wind, and followeth after the east wind which came from Syria. He daily increaseth lies and desolation, and they do make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried into Egypt. Yeah, we're about to see it. We're about to see it. Just like Ahaz, king of Judah, made a covenant with the Assyrians to save himself from two problems. What was his problems? His problems were due north, king of Israel. What's Israel's problem due north? Hezbollah, southern Lebanon. His other problem was northeast, Syria. What's Israel's other problem? Syria. It's the only neighbour that wants to see Israel destroyed. All the rest are at peace with Israel. And a bit further northeast, you've got Iran. Yeah. I'm going to show over the course of this weekend that an agreement is going to be formed between Russia and Israel that will see the end of the problem of Iran's nuclear weapons, the end of the problem with Syria, the end of the problem with Hezbollah and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, leading to the fulfilment of Ezekiel 38 verses 8 to 12, which say that the peace that descends upon the Middle East before Armageddon is not far away. It's not far away. So what would a covenant between Russia and Israel achieve? Russian control of Syria removes the last enemy among the nations surrounding Israel. Russian domination of Iran would end the nuclear threat to Israel. Any agreement would include Russian approval for Israel to eliminate Iranian-backed Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And Israel will annex the West Bank as a result of it. Ezekiel 38 verse 8. You know what it says? When God comes down upon the mountains of Israel, he comes down upon the West Bank. I want to show you that in a minute. The Gaza Strip will become the homeland of the Palestinians. Joel 3, Zephaniah 2 indicate that. But they'll be at peace with Israel. You see, Ezekiel 38 verse 8 says, when God comes down, he comes down against the mountains of Israel. So where are these mountains of Israel? Well, 90% of them just happen to be in the West Bank, from Hebron to Gilboa. So what that means, brothers and sisters, is that at some point in the near future, Israel's going to take control of the West Bank. And when Netanyahu was elected last year, you know what he said? ultimately we're going to take over the West Bank. That's why he's building settlements there at the moment. Okay, he's going to take over the West Bank. When they do that, they can take down the wall that's around the Green Line, living without walls and bars and gates, having security, at peace. Yeah, it'll happen because of the covenant with the Assyrian of the latter day. It's all going to end very sadly for a faithless Ahaz-like nation, isn't it? Very sadly. Because we read in Ezekiel 38 verse 10, at the same time shall things come into thy mind and thou shalt think an evil thought. There's nothing more evil than making a solemn covenant when you intend to break it. Nothing more evil than that. And it's happened before. Guess who to? Russia. On the 23rd of August 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed what was called the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, agreeing that the two countries would not attack each other in the future. The pact was broken when Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union less than 2 years later on the 22nd of June 1941. Stalin was so stunned by this because he was so confident that this covenant, this agreement with Hitler would hold, he'd actually gone and shot his best generals because they were competition to his leadership. So he shot them all. Brothers and sisters, we're going to talk about the Assyrian invasion in our next study, God willing. We're going to see how all of those things of the past are a wonderful pattern for the things of the present and the future. And the great thing about all that is we are being prepared to be involved in it. And when all this happens and unfolds and the latter day Assyrian comes into God's land, guess who's going to be there to meet him? You and me. By the grace of God.